Hey, this is Meredith Elliott Powell, and you know what time it is. It's my favorite time of the week. It is time for Thrive, the show where we dive into the strategies, discuss the steps, everything that you need to know to really consistently turn uncertainty to your greatest competitive advantage. Now, we have a powerhouse on the show today. We're going to talk about a very important subject. And in a world that is moving this fast, this subject is even more critical in today's marketplace. That's how do you innovate? How do you create, not just for yourself? But for your teams. Welcome to the show. A good friend of mine, but really one of the most probably creative and innovative people that I know. This topic has been a passion of hers for a long time, so much so that she's gone on and gotten a PhD in this incredible area. So, welcome to the show, Dr. Amy Clymer.
Thank you, Meredith. It's so good to be here.
Good to be here too. Good to have you. And so you are the author of a brand new book, Deliberate Creative Teams: How to Lead for Innovative Results. And I want to get to that book in just a little bit. Love that you have it with you. But I want to back up and I think, to me, innovation and creativity are words that are used like communication, right? I mean, they're such big words that can mean so many different things to so many people. So I'm curious as to how you got into the field when you sort of found this as a passion for yours. And then what do you really mean when you're talking about innovation and creativity?
Okay, these are good questions because you're right. We throw these words around a lot.
Yeah.
So, first, I got into this, literally, even as far back as high school. I can remember I would get really frustrated with my friends if they would say they weren't creative. And I'd be like, what? No, of course you're creative. And I'd try to pump them up and encourage them. And of course, I didn't know the definition of creativity then. But fast forward, I spent most of my adulthood, my professional career, like with sort of a toe into creativity or teaching creative workshops, or I got really into the artist way early in
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
90s
Great
and the
book.
2000s. And I had some experiences that you've probably had, maybe many of your listeners have had, where some teams that was on professionally were super creative, innovative, amazing, loved being a part of those teams. And then other teams just felt stagnant. They were shooting down ideas left and right, and I dreaded going to those team meetings. And I got really curious, like, what is the difference between these groups? Because I could see that all the team members were intelligent, smart, dedicated people, but there was some differences there. And so that's when I got really geeky and go in and got a PhD so I could really dive into this. And from all that, the definition that I've learned, I did not invent this, but the definition that's out there in the literature is creativity is novelty that is valuable.
Mm.
That's it. So novel could mean unique, different, new, original. Valuable could be anything. It could be financially valuable, it could be emotionally valuable, it could be something that makes us more productive or efficient or effective, whatever valuable means to that context. So creativity is novelty that is valuable.
So how long have we been talking about innovation and creativity in the workplace?
Oh gosh, well, the turning point was in 1950
Uh-huh.
when the head of the American Psychological Association, the president, did a speech at the conference that year and like really pushed and encouraged people to study creativity. So then all these psychologists, got on board and they started looking at it. And even as far back as 1970s, there were, I would want to say 125 studies just looking at if creativity could be taught.
Wow.
And we've known that far back that creativity is something that you can teach, it can be learned, it is not something you're born with, even though many people think that. So we've come a long way in the last, what, 70 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember hearing about it back in the workplace. I think really when it became mainstream for me was really like in the early '90s, and But I look at it now, Amy, and I think about, Accenture just released a report that said the pace of change has increased 183% in the last 4 years. And it's expected to increase another 33% this year in 2025 alone. So the world is moving fast. Where do you see, since you started in this work, I mean, you've been in this space quite a bit for a long time, where do you see innovation? Where do you see the place for innovation now? And why do teams need to be adapting or embracing innovation and creativity?
I think it's critical. Well, a great example for many industries, not all, but many industries, like massive change during the COVID pandemic. And some businesses, some organizations were really nimble and quick, and they're like, oh, things are changing. We need to respond. Let's get creative. How are we going to provide our services or products, given the changes? And they thrived. Other organizations and businesses like, you know what? This is going to pass. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit back. And some of them aren't in business anymore, or they really, really struggled. I know you and I are both members of the National Speakers Association, and we saw that even just within
Yeah.
membership. It was really interesting. So the thing with innovation is you need to be able to do it. In some ways, you want to be like kind of always aware and paying attention and like what needs to change. But at the same time, you never know when something big is going to happen.
Hmm.
Something like a pandemic. I mean, even just something like, as we're seeing the last recently, just
Yeah.
the new president is in office and things are changing because laws are changing and you just don't know what's going to happen. And you need to be able to innovate so that you can be responsive and thrive in those situations.
So you write this book, Deliberate Creative Teams. Talk to me a little bit about the title and the whole theme around deliberate.
Hmm. I say all the time that creativity does not happen by accident.
Hmm.
And I think we have these myths that we've perpetuated that are causing some problems. One that I talk about in the book that's very famous is Sir Isaac Newton, 1600s. He's hanging out in a garden, and this apple falls from a tree and hits him on the head. And in that instant, he shouts, Eureka! Because he discovered gravity. Yeah, that is not what happened at all. Yeah, I mean, that would be a true
Shatter
miracle,
Shattering the myth.
right? Instead, what happened we do think he did actually see an apple fall from a tree and kind of notice that. Obviously, thousands, maybe millions of people had seen that before, but he then spent 21 years trying to understand why do things fall down to the ground and not sideways or up or float around. At the time he saw that apple, he already had a master's degree from Cambridge. He already had started the work to develop what is now the field of calculus. So this wasn't just like some average person hanging out. And it then took him 21 years. He finally published his work in the book Principia, and where he outlined the universal laws of the physical world, one of those being gravity. And so I say deliberate because that's what's happened in every single example of innovation. Even if you get a spark of an idea, say you're in the shower or you're driving and an idea comes to you, it still takes a lot of deliberate work to bring that to fruition.
Right.
And the idea alone, I, I really believe ideas are almost worthless. It's what do you do with those ideas that really matter. And teams that are deliberate about being creative, they produce better results.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So the idea, I love the fact that you said ideas are almost worthless because I remember a million years ago, I was driving my nephew to school and some song came on the radio and he said, "Oh, I thought of that song a long time ago." And I said, "Well, the difference between you and the person who put that on the radio was they took action and you didn't." Like really having the idea. Where does one start? If I were somebody who thought, okay, I'm not innovative, I'm not creative, or I need my team to be more nimble or more creative. Where do I start?
I think one of the biggest things that leaders or team members can do is just understanding how creativity works. And we inadvertently do all these things that sort of shoot down creativity. But when you understand how it works, so I developed this model where I identified three elements that teams need if they want to be creative together. Two of them you've heard of 100 times: team purpose. Teams need
Mhm.
to have a clear sense of purpose. You know, everyone needs to be on board, know what they're doing together. The second is team dynamics, and that team members need to be able to trust each other, have good communication, be able to engage in some conflict. But essentially, team dynamics is how they interact, their behaviors, right? We talk about team purpose and team dynamics all the time.
Right.
Third one that we don't talk about very much is called team creative process. So, what is happening in a team meeting? What's the work that you're doing as a team? It's really how you're doing that work. And there is a process for being creative together. There's one that I lay out in the book. It's a four-stage process, and there are many variations of the one that I present. The point here is that everyone on the team needs to know and understand that process. And if they don't, what happens is everyone kind of has their own perspective, their own preferences, and there's no alignment. And so one person thinks that they're like, we're in the implementing stage. And we're like, all right, let's get started. And then the other person's still clarifying, like, wait, what exactly is the problem? We need to ask more questions. And there's this, butting of heads, so to speak, that prevents teams from moving forward, and they just stagnate or get into, toxic arguments, and it's kind of a hot mess. But when you understand the process, it's kind of like magic.
Right. Makes what you're going through make sense. To me, when I think about innovation and creativity, it seems it's hard to wrap my hands around, and companies and teams are so results driven. So there I am as a leader. I can imagine me walking into the C-suite where we're dealing with all these changes going in the marketplace, and I've got to reach quarterly goals. And I start talking about innovation and creativity. How do
Mm.
you position innovation and creativity as a hard skill?
When you say hard skill, as in like a technical skill that people need to learn?
Yeah, like kind of what I mean is that I speak a lot on the soft skills, and I hate that they're called soft skills because people think that we think of soft as negative, right?
Right.
And, or nice to have, but isn't critical. That's a better way to put it. And in my opinion, the soft skills are I would rather have soft skills than I would rather have hard skills, right? And I'm feeling like innovation and creativity is if I'm a leader, I definitely get it. When I look at the fact that I've got to lead a team through 2025 and the marketplace is probably going to shift on me at least on a quarterly basis, if not more rapidly than that. I need to build a team that is nimble. I need to build a team that is agile. I need to build a team that is thinking creatively to get through the obstacles and problems in front of them. Get all that. But now I gotta go sell innovation and creativity to the CFO, the COO, and the CEO of the company. How do you kind of navigate those bridges or those challenges?
I think that the when teams have the ability to innovate, they have the ability to actually work faster.
Okay.
And I sometimes use the phrase go slow to go fast. And I don't mean, take your time, whatever. But I do think there's a real value in pausing, getting this training. For instance, like one of the things I do is I work with companies and I teach them how this process, how to be creative together. And when they get that, they're able to work so much faster because they are moving through this process in a linear-ish way versus before, not on purpose, they just didn't know. They're like all over the place,
Right.
and they start implementing something and they're about to put it to market. Turns out they never even talked to a single customer about it. And they've put all this money and time into something that, wow, if they had just slowed down a little bit, done a little ideation, done some work around that, they could have a much stronger, more powerful result. So I do think when teams learn the process, they learn how creativity works, they go much faster. And yeah, it's sort of like, you pause to sharpen your
Right.
saw. You sharpen your blade because it's gonna make you safer, it's gonna make the cut better. Whereas if you sit there and, like, struggle trying to get through some wood or whatever you're cutting, it's so much quicker just to pause.
So, what about this idea? Are some people born more innovative and creative than other people? Is it a side of the brain? Is it is there anything to that?
Not really.
Mhm.
There's been some studies on twins, which is, how we decide if
Yeah.
something is nature versus nurture. And what they found is that at most, creativity is 21% genetic.
Oh, interesting.
So let's imagine that you have someone with like maximum genetic potential for being creative, so 21%. And then you have someone with zero, but then, which, is probably never really zero.
Right.
But that person with maximum potential does nothing with it versus the person with 0, like, figures out the process, understand how creativity is working. So they're basically now at 73% or no,
Right.
that's the number, 79. Every time I would bet on the person who has done the work and figured out how to be creative.
Yeah.
And, if you think about people in your life who that are creative, chances are if you got them talking, you could find out that they had been doing creative things since they were a kid.
Mhm.
So they had been learning, like, oh, let me tinker with this and see what happens. And they were learning this process of iterating and trying and failing and trying again. And they've just taken those skills into adulthood.
Mhm.
And that's really what creativity is about. So people say to me all the time, oh, no, I don't have a creative bone in my body. And I'm like, yes, you
Yes,
do.
you do.
What, 212? Is that how many bones we have?
Well,
We have a
the other thing,
okay.
I wonder too, do companies nurture it out of us or school nurture it out of us? I'm always fascinated by especially young girls. I mean, young girls are so full of themselves and so in charge of everything. And then I watch a lot of women come into the workforce and we don't really take that role. And I wonder, is it there a point at which that's nurtured out of us? And do you see innovation and creativity nurtured out of us in the workforce?
I actually yes, a little bit, more so I see it nurtured out of us in school, like in
Mm,
K-12 education, and it's actually completely by design. We have like I said before, we've known since the '70s that if you teach people to be creative, they will be more creative. But it's not really the point of school in the US.
right.
We have designed our school system to be a place where people follow the rules, they're searching for the one right answer. I often will ask when I'm doing a keynote, I'll ask audiences, raise your hand if you remember a time in school where you took a test and the test question asked, what are all the reasons or all the possible reasons for da 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 da? And usually one or two people will raise their hand and it was such an unusual question
Uh-huh.
that they remember the exact
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And because, we're asked like multiple choice questions, like there's one
Right.
right answer. But then we become adults and we're out in the work world. There's almost never a right answer.
No.
There's 100 ways to do the same thing, but we've now lost that skill, that divergent thinking skill that is so critical.
Mhm. Yeah, and I wonder too, I wonder if it's a little more, nurtured out of us now too, because children are so much more structured than they used to be. When you're on your own, you have to be creative. I mean, especially I remember growing up and all we had to in the wintertime was just a field and a ball, and so versus like living in the city where you might have a lot of options. So you've written this book, and I'm so excited. Mine's going to be delivered tomorrow. What I love about the book, from what I've read so far, is that you've really chocked it full of tools and resources
Mm,
and exercises. And
mhm,
we've talked about learning the framework, but what do you really feel are some of your favorites as far as tools and resources in the book? And I love the fact that the book is written for like you read it, but you've really made it very easy to execute and
mhm.
implement.
Yeah, I mean, the book is based on research and there's this academic foundation, but it is not written for academics. It is written for leaders who wanna put this into practice. So, yeah, there's a lot of techniques and tools and that you can use with your team. One of them that might be a good place to start is understanding the difference between divergent thinking and convergent thinking,
Okay.
which builds on what we were just talking about, where divergent thinking is where we are looking for all the possibilities. Like, you got a particular problem, let's just list 100 different ways we might solve this problem. And now, obviously, if you list 100 approaches, 100 ideas, a lot of them are not gonna be good. A lot
Right.
of them aren't gonna work, and so then you go into a convergent phase and you start evaluating and culling down the ideas, like, which ones have some possibility here? And often what happens in team meetings or, when we're trying to solve a problem is someone presents an idea and immediately someone else evaluates it. And sometimes we don't even get to another idea unless we've decided that first one is not good.
Right.
Well, if you can change the structure and instead say, we're going to do some divergent thinking for a few minutes. And for 5 minutes, we're going to get as many ideas as we can. Maybe you get 10 ideas. Teams that are really experienced with this can get 15 to 50 ideas in 5 minutes. When you get all those ideas, then you move into a convergent thinking mindset and you start evaluating those ideas. And you will have better ideas if you do that one thing. I think you can set aside 5 minutes to solve a big problem, right? And even if you spend more, like, let's spend an hour generating ideas. Wow, now you're really gonna get some good stuff.
How often does a leader present innovation and creativity? Is it part of every team meeting that you have? Is it something you do on a quarterly basis? Are there different styles and strategies to it? What is the rule of thumb there?
I think that really depends on the purpose of the team
Mhm.
and the organization and where they're at. I think some teams are put together with the intent that this team's gonna be highly innovative and iterate a lot. Other teams are more of like a maintenance style team where they probably don't need to do a lot of innovation. Maybe once in a while they might innovate on their process or make some changes there. But I really think it varies. It's very, need dependent on the organization. Even though I am a big proponent of creativity in teams, I don't believe that every team needs to be creative all the time. That just
Right.
doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard to believe, but we are at the end of this podcast. I really recommend that people, I just don't hear this topic talked about that
Mm,
often, innovation and creativity. And as I said, in a world that is moving so fast, so rapidly, it is so critical in today's marketplace that we not only create the environment where people can be innovative and creative, but give them the tools and resources to do that. So, how do people? I always like to end with two questions. You can answer them in either order. Number 1 is, how do people get a hold of you? How did they find out about the book? We'll certainly have everything in the show notes here. But the second is, if you're gonna leave this audience with one piece of advice on how they could turn uncertainty to their greatest competitive advantage, what would that advice be?
mm. Okay, first I'll share how to find me, which you can go to my website, which is climerconsulting.com. And Climer is spelled Climer. And you can check out my brand new book called Deliberate Creative Teams: How to Lead for Innovative Results. You can go to deliberateCreativeTeams.com or you can find it anywhere books are sold. I have this just came out, I mean, days ago from this recording, and up until March 30th, 2025, there's some fun bonuses available, so if you do buy the book, be sure to go to the website to check those out. And then the second question was, say it for
Best piece of advice you wanna
okay.
leave this audience with for those struggling to figure out how to thrive in an uncertain marketplace?
My best piece of advice is be deliberate to be creative. If you leave it to chance, it will not happen. And if you want to thrive in uncertainty, you need to be creative. You need innovation.
Well, audience, you heard it here. Be deliberate to be creative. I love that. It almost sounds a little like it's not necessarily the way we would think about creativity, but make a plan, and that way you will open the opportunity to be creative and to be innovative. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. And audience, thank you for joining us every single week for another episode. You know, we are on a mission here. We want people to learn to believe that uncertainty is their greatest competitive advantage. That's why every week we come to you with the tools and the resources that you need. We'll see you right back here next week for another episode.